Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Dallas After Show here on JLJ Media. I'm your host, James Lott Jr. And today's talk, as you saw probably in the title, the fourth Ewing son, Ray Krebs, which I always thought was kind of cool that he didn't change his name to Ewing. Take a look at my coffee. We talked about Ray earlier in the season of the show with him and Lucy and that whole storyline. So you know, well, diehard fans know originally Ray was not meant to be a fourth Ewing son, but it's soap opera. You know, that's what I do. We love illegitimate children. That's what happens on soaps. But a little background: Ray was born. I didn't know this part. Was born October 18, 1944. Amos Krebs was his father. His mother, Margaret Hunter Krebs, didn't know after he left when he was 3 years old. At 15, Ray was sent to Dallas and to the South Fork Ranch with a letter from his mother who had died to Jock saying, help Ray out. So Ray's mother was a nurse in the Army. Jock was in the Army. They had an affair during World War II, and then Ray became. But they didn't know. There was no mention of him or like any inkling that he was his son. So of course they find out later. They use some of the things I think are very interesting. We talk about Ray Krebbs as a character on the show. So he was a shareholder in Ewing Oil, of course. He owned Ray Krebbs Villas, Saddle Tree Enterprises. This was over time. He had a Krebbs ranch. He had that brief dalliance with half-niece Lucy, which we talked about in a previous episode, which is kind of funny. But I'm going to go into some more details. So he married Donna Culver, who was a widow of, I think it was a governor or senator. I liked them together. It was kind of that whole like almost opposites attract thing, but she was kind of tough too. Donna was a great character. She was tough. I love Donna and her interactions with JR. She didn't take any S from him. I always thought it was kind of good. But Donna came from, I remember Donna had her stepson that she was very close to. He was an adult, and they would interact on different things that were going on. But Donna and Ray, I liked them together. It was just kind of like, I want to say Beauty and the Beast, because Ray was not like a beast, but just like he was of the earth, of the land, you know, and Donna was more city. But they were really good. I thought they were really good together. They during the dream season, which I liked the dream season. We call it the dream season now, but I liked that season. And she was gonna have a kid with Down syndrome. That was something they were dealing with at one point. But then they adopted a boy named Tony who was deaf, and they were using sign language on the show. Actually, but that was very cool. Because as an actor, I'm sure that was very cool to learn sign language. We thought it'd be kind of cool. And so I thought that was, but then of course that was a dream season, so they got all washed away. But later, she had Margaret Krebs, and so Ray has his daughter out there. And I always imagine, I don't know about you guys out there, the next generation of Ewings, there's a bunch of them, right? And I always thought Margaret would take after her father. But I don't know. But now that I'm thinking, if she was raised by her mom, maybe she'd be more civic-minded. Maybe she want to run for politics. That wasn't her. That was her mother's ex-husband or late husband. I was wondering. And now I'm trying to wonder. My original thought was Margaret becomes like she comes back to South Fork and runs the ranch. That was always my thought. She was a tough girl, Texan, but then she wasn't raised in Texas. So I was like, I'm going back and forth. She wasn't really raised in Texas, so maybe she isn't a Texan. Maybe she isn't a ranch girl. Or she comes back and realizes that she likes this life and becomes of the earth, possibly reconnects to her dad and becomes that. So, but I guess the bottom line is Margaret has a lot of possibilities. Just by her parents, she has a lot of possibilities. But Donna and Ray didn't last, and they split up. Then he got with Jenna Wade, which I thought was a very interesting choice, because Jenna came from Bobby. But it still kind of worked. Still Presley and Steve Kanaly had some chemistry. They were together, but she had Lucas, which is Bobby's child. That's another one I think of possibilities, that he's the real Bobby Ewing's son, not Christopher. I always thought, would have been interesting if Dallas had continued, the new Dallas continued, bring him back to really try to stick it to Christopher. But see, in my scenario, Christopher would be more like JR, and John Ross would be more like Bobby. I would say I would have switched them. John Ross would have been the good guy, and Christopher would have been the bad guy, because Christopher was trying to prove how much of a Ewing he is. You know, he's adopted. And having Lucas come, that would be a threat. Like, no, I'm here. You know, I worked very hard for this. I was here the whole time. You were off in Europe or wherever the F you were. That could be a great conflict. And Lucas trying to reconnect with his family. Now, another storyline could be he tries to connect with his father, Bobby, and they have a tough time at it. But then he sees he likes the oil business or whatever the energy, whatever they're doing at the time of TNT. Again, still a threat to Christopher, but he likes John Ross. And then him and Margaret, I'd have them be close, because they connected as adults, and so they consider themselves brother and sister. Also, stepsister Charlie's out there, half sister Charlie's out there too, but we won't worry about her. But maybe Margaret and Lucas come together and say, we're going to come in and make ourselves known as Ewings. Like, they come together to really, like, a partnership. They take back their heritage and their birthright and their legacy. We love those kind of stories, right? But again, I guess, and you out there probably have a million different stories for Lucas. I think the bottom line is Lucas and Margaret both are very rich characters, and they still involve Ray and Bobby and Donna. We're going to bring Donna in here and there, but it's in Jenna Wade. It involves all these rich characters from the original series, all the adults. So it can be all intertwined in a whole messy mess, which we like on ourselves. But they're two characters that really, there's some more Ewing characters, but I'll talk about later in the series as we go along, that I think could be good too. Again, as seasons move on, you add new people, and there's plenty of Ewings to go around, plenty. Because I know you can start with James and Jimmy and Terrence. There's all these Ewings just out there. And then the TNT series, they suggested JR had a daughter. That's a whole other story. And we'll talk about that some way too. But also, I think Lucas would have some resentment, like, why didn't Bobby even try to get to know him? You know, why didn't he, why he just let him go off with Ray and Jenna? Or why didn't Bobby try to get to know him? I mean, I'm just wondering, Lucas would have all these questions. I think Lucas would have all these questions there too. So Ray did come back for the War of the Ewings movie. And, and on TNT, he came back to both weddings to Pamela Reckable, his nephews. But Jasmine, he made a comment that he could never be good enough as JR. He could never make his dad proud as JR. And I don't, it seemed to me from watching the series when he was the ranch hand, that Jock liked Ray, when he didn't know he was his son or whatever. He liked Ray. But then Jock died. So we don't really fully know what could have happened, right, between Ray and Jock. And seemingly you would think they're similar. Maybe. I don't even know, because Jock wasn't close to Gary. And that's why Gary, one of the reasons why Gary left, went to California. Knots Landing reference. We don't know. We need a chance to fully explore Ray and Jock, like some shows would do if Jock was still alive, or you cast Jock. They didn't recast him. The whole West Parmley story, we'll talk about that later in the series too. But it wasn't, and see what's funny is if they did, okay, so they made West Parmley actually Jock Ewing or whatever, they made the whole thing, they made Homeboy Jock, they recast Jock Ewing. Then it would be really interesting, but it would change the whole course of the series, because JR and Bobby had free reign. They didn't have a daddy figure above them to put them in line or question them. That would really be an interesting dynamic. Your father comes back. Then what does JR do? What does Bobby do? And then when he says, I want to add Ray into the mix. That would be an interesting storyline. That'd be very interesting. They went that direction. Ray just, it was cool that he was another Ewing, but he was his own. He was a character that was his own. He was involved in the family stuff, but he was his own person. And he's always remained that way. He has his own kind of identity. But I liked the character Ray. I liked him. I liked the character. He was a good guy. He wasn't perfect, but he was a good guy, and I liked the character. And it's funny that as I'm talking about this with you guys, I'm feeling like Ray is a conduit to many storylines actually that could be. He's actually involved in so much stuff. Like I didn't really think about it before how involved he was. I mean, there's so many things. There's so many things, possibilities in a new series that he could be a part of. So, but anyway, but that's Ray Krebs. That's my thoughts. You tell me your thoughts too. I love hearing your thoughts. I love hearing what you write. It's what you remember. Continue to tell me things I don't know, because I know some folks said they from other countries, or they've read things that are different than I've heard. I love hearing about the stuff I don't know. I don't know everything. I watched the show from the beginning when it came out, but I don't know everything. I didn't read everything in the papers, or I read some stuff. But yeah, continue to tell me what you've heard in relation to all this stuff. I love it. Thanks to all the Dallas Facebook groups. I love you guys. You guys allow me to post these in there. And to all the Dallas message boards, thank you so much for letting me do this. I am working on trying to get guests on the show. Maybe Steve Kanaly will come on. If he sees this, maybe he'll come on. I'd love to get him on here and talk to him. So I'm still working on that. We'll see what happens. But everyone, take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time when we talk about Dallas.